Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Jay. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about this August Alsina, Jada Pinkett situation and how I think this shit is so freaking crazy right now. According to August Alsina, he and Jada Pinkett had an affair for multiple years that was itself sanctioned by Will Smith. Now, Will Smith and his family Will Smith and his family, sorry about that, guys, technical difficulties. Will Smith and his family took in um, August Alsina in sort of a mentoring type role because um, he's close in age to Will's oldest son. And apparently, August and Jada Pinkett Smith, Will's wife, had this affair, according to August Alsina. And he really fell for her, like really started catching feelings for her. And she even denied the affair went on, but according to him, Will gave the go ahead. Now, for years, we have known that Will Smith um, and Jada Pinkett Smith is in an open marriage or open relationship. So it really doesn't surprise me that something like this would go down. But a lot of people are upset about it too because of the age difference. Alcina at the time was in his 20s, while Jada is a woman like in her 40s, so she's old enough to be his mother. You know what I mean? But some dudes like older women. You know what I mean? Especially like when they come from abusive homes and they don't really have a mother figure in their life. They develop feelings for a woman that's like a mother to them. You know what I mean? So that's pretty common. But what I find interesting in this whole situation is you have a woman for the first time being thought of as a predator on a man that's younger. Whereas usually when you hear about cases like this, even in the celebrity world in Hollywood, you always hear about it being a man, older man like Bill Cosby or something, preying on a younger woman. You know what I mean? You don't really hear about it the other way around. But this, they're coming down hard on Jada for this shit. You know what I mean? Because she's always giving out advice on that Red Table Talk show, acting like she's like the next Dr. Phil or the next Oprah. You know what I mean? And she got skeletons in her closet too. You know what I mean? I said this before when I talked about Jordan B. Peterson, is that a lot of times the people that give advice, they got the most screwed up outlook and they're screwed up mentally their own self. You know what I mean? So you got to really watch it when you take advice from these professional advice givers. You know what I mean? And another thing, another aspect I wanted to touch on with this topic is August itself, how he's so enamored and so um, how he really like models himself after Tupac, and we know that Tupac and Jada had this liking for each other. So one of the reasons, if he was the one indeed that initiated the relationship, one of the reasons he probably initiated the relationship was because of his love for Tupac and wanting to copy Pac. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the August Alsina situation. August Alsina, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett situation. Other things going on right now. We're backpedaling from the coronavirus situation in several states already. The ones that open back up, like Florida and Texas, already having a spike in reinfections. I mean, a resurgence of it, so they're gonna have to reclose again coming up this 4th of July weekend. And also political debates about the history of the United States and how are we to interpret the history of the United States, because once again, uh, we're looking at our society and we're reassessing our society and our values and what we believe to be appropriate and what we believe to be inappropriate and unacceptable. You know, they're talking about tearing down Mount Rushmore, tearing down this statue, and that statue. And I never really gave my opinion on the statue, you know what I mean? Because I feel like where I come from, in my religious point of view, my religious perspective, I don't I don't really care about statues. To me, that's idol worship. You know what I mean? Uh, the Bible says, "Don't make that man shall not make a graven image." You know what I mean? So these people existed in history: Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Christopher Columbus, George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt. All these guys. You know what I mean? They existed. You know what I mean? They were flawed human beings. They were people like us. You know what I mean? They have racist views. They have bigoted views. Many of them were men of their time. You know, I'm not being an apologist or anything. Some of them were vicious racists, like Andrew Jackson, vicious racist. Um, the Trail of Tears drove out all the Native Americans in the Southeast. You know what I mean? I'm not being an apologist for them. I'm just saying that this is human nature. You know what I mean? Like every leader you look at, you're gonna find that they have flaws in them. You know what I mean? There's an old saying: never live to meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed. You know, and it's true because you grow up, you idolize. You can't meet these people from history, but the more that you learn about them, and the more you learn about how they were really just men like us, like the founding fathers. The founding fathers, particularly James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, they're regarded as, you know, gods among men by the people in the United States, particularly the Caucasian people and white Americans. You know what I mean? Because they wrote the Constitution, they wrote the Declaration of Independence, and whatever. You know what I mean? And these are great documents, and these are great ideals to aspire to. But at the same time, they owned slaves. They were flawed men. So history is all about narrative. You can choose to focus on the narrative of them being flawed men and choose to all day long point out the flaws in them. And you could point out the flaws in every president, every leader throughout history, and every person throughout history. If you knew more about me, you could point out my flaws. You know what I mean? We can point at each other's flaws all day long, but that really gets us nowhere. But in terms of statues, I feel the statue should be taken down because we're supposed to be living in a Judeo-Christian society, and the Ten Commandments does not sanction statues of secular beings or any beings at all. It's idolatry. It's one of the biggest battles in history between the iconoclastics in the church and those that were against it, like Martin Luther. You know, that was one of the biggest objections that the Protestants had, was that the Catholics put up statues of Mary, they put up statues of various saints, and they worship them. And these founding fathers and stuff is kind of like the American version of saints. You know what I mean? We don't hold the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And rather than hold that ideal in regard, we hold the man that wrote the idea in regard. But if you try to do that and do that purity test, the man himself fails at that because Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, right? So it started. It started with Confederate statues, and that was to a degree that was understandable because, well, the Confederacy was the traitors to the United States, and they didn't deserve statues anyway. And plus, they put those statues up during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, not the 1860s when they were actually fighting the war. So those were acceptable. Now they've gone to other Union type figures and other figures that were Revolutionary War figures. But to me, they all should come down. To me, a reevaluation of United States history is necessary because we only see when we learn about history, we learn about it from one person's point, from one people's point of view, and that's the point of view of white Americans. We never learn about it from the point of view of blacks or Hispanics or Native Americans or um, marginalized groups like Asians or nothing, any of that. You know what I mean? Even some of the white ethnic groups, like Jewish and Italian Americans, we never really learned. We learned about how they became a melting pot and how they assimilated into the general white population, but we don't really learn what it was like and the kind of social barriers that they might have felt at that time. So, looking at history from an alternative point of view, like the 1619 Project wants to do, is imperative, you know? And this whole George Floyd thing has mushroomed into something much bigger to the point where we cannot fix the social injustice problems that we have in today's society that caused the death of men and women like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and even the missing and abduction of Vanessa Gilliam, if we don't reevaluate that history and where that dehumanization and that bigotry and that bias came from, you know, and we can't start to move on if we don't deal with our past. And America has never really dealt with its past. We keep retelling ourselves the same story over and over. The Pilgrims, from there to the American Revolution, from the American Revolution to the Glorious Union, from there to Manifest Destiny, from there to World War One, from there to the Roaring Twenties, from there to the Great Depression, from there we defeated the Nazis in World War Two, from there we engaged in the Cold War with the Russians, which included Korea and Vietnam. From there, um, we went to space, and from there, um, we helped lead the way, and communism fell in 1989. And then you had the 90s, and you had the war on terror. But we never really look at history from a different point of view and a different perspective. And that's what was it like for those that were included on the outside, on the outskirts of what America was supposed to be? Like this American project that took place, that began in July 4th, 1776, was very unique because human beings had self-governed before, right? In Athens was the birthplace of democracy, but it was limited democracy. This to an extent was an extended democracy, but it was still very limited. Poor whites who didn't own property couldn't vote. Blacks couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. Native Americans were kept out of the discussion, so it was limited. And as over time, Jacksonian reforms, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, it got expanded, right? But what good is legal rights if social change doesn't occur? And people are going to say, well, okay, fuck that social justice warrior bullshit. I don't care about a syrup bottle, Angel Mama changing or whatever. Well, I don't care about Bubba Wallace. And Bubba Wallace um, is that gentleman um, who apparently NASCAR driver who found a noose in his closet. But okay, Say Bubba Wallace is lying. Does stuff like that not happen to other people? Does that invalidate his experience, even if he is lying? His experience as an individual, yes, that didn't happen to him, but it happens though. You know what I mean? You acknowledge that it does happen. You know what I mean? So uh, I don't think that really invalidates him. You know what I mean? It's just like when you hear about a story like August Alsina's, and you say, well, do do couples really take in and start to groom potential molestation victims? Or well, he was an adult, but still try to take advantage of someone emotionally, and then lead to it physically. Of course, it happens. Whether it happens to August, in the case of August and Jada Kiss, is irrelevant because I mean, excuse me, Jada. Pause. Jada Pinkett, not Jada Kiss. um, Jada Pinkett is irrelevant because it happens. You know what I mean? We know about a case in the wrestling in the wrestling community that the wrestling world is a buzz about, where wrestling manager Jim Cornette, promoter and manager Jim Cornette from Smoky Mountain Wrestling and Ohio Valley Wrestling, and he was the manager of the Heavenly Bodies and the manager of the Midnight Express and everything. He has a successful podcast where wrestlers accused him and his wife, forcing them to engage in sexual acts in turn for pushes or opportunities in the wrestling in the wrestling promotion. So this kind of stuff does happen every day in the workplace, and whether or not it happened to August is irrelevant. So just like with Bubba Wallace, racial harassment does happen in the workplace, particularly um, in a predominantly white sport, or NASCAR it is a sport, but in a predominantly white sport like NASCAR, you know what I mean? It's understandable that somebody who's not only a man of color, but somebody who's advocating for racial justice in the form of having Black Lives Matter written on his car would experience such discrimination. You know what I mean? So my point is, before you try to invalidate another person's experience and say, well, it isn't true for you, so it's not true across the board, that's bull, guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, Jesse Smollett didn't get jumped outside Chicago by guys wearing a MAGA hat, but that doesn't mean that my guys that wear MAGA hats don't jump people. I mean, look at that one couple you just saw. What was it 2 days ago? Shooting out a shootout. Come on, man. We have so much going on in the world, so much stuff, man, so much nonsense, man. It's just a crazy time, man. And on top of that, we have the election um, coming up, and we haven't heard anything from Joe Biden. We know that Joe Biden mental state is very deteriorating daily. You know, not to say that Trump is the sharpest knife in the drawer. He's not. He's obviously Trump is completely off his rocker, and he's very unpopular, even with his base. You know, he's been so for very long. He's very unpopular. But I feel like if Joe Biden could pick the right running mate, maybe August Alsina, Alsina, right? Pick him as a running, pick him as a running mate. He'll get all the women, right? Older women. You know, it could he can seriously though he can make something happen with Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams, because he needs somebody that's competent, and he's not so competent right now. You know, in order to defeat Trump and Mike Pence. You know, peace, guys. And stay safe and have a happy 4th of July. Remember what I said. Reassessing history and thinking of it in terms of not just being a barbecue or a time to get together with family, but the actual meaning and significance of the holiday and what it meant to those who were enslaved at that time. Peace.